Roma's got you covered. Pleasure Pulse, every Tuesday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Only on Unsafe Radio 96.1 FM. Don't miss out. Your sex education journey starts this Tuesday with Roma as your guide.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Pleasure Pulse. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and you're joining me live on ZIZ on Facebook, YouTube, and on radio, as usual. I am grateful that you're here with me tonight for this conversation. But before I get into tonight's topic, as usual, I like to give you all a few to let everybody know that Pleasure Pulse is live. You can share the link around, you can tell people to tune in, and then we will get started with tonight's conversation. So we'll take a short break and come right back. Stay tuned. Good evening, and you're back and you're in tune to Pleasure Pulse. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and as I mentioned, I'm so grateful that you are joining me tonight for this evening's conversation. I'm here solo. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes, there are only so many people who can talk about sex, so sometimes I'll be here by myself. It'll just be you and me, and we'll be like we're in a conversation with each other, which we usually are. It's just that there's usually somebody else or more than one person. But I am going to get into a topic that is not very easy to discuss. Lots of topics around sex are difficult topics and difficult conversations to have, difficult but necessary. And when it comes to children's issues especially, it becomes all the more hard to talk about, heart-rending to talk about, because, children, I think, are definitely stay within like the innocent, protected group of society that we all kind of agree should be treated a certain kind of way. So talking about sexual violence and sexual assault and issues related to sex in connection with children and young people isn't always easier. Plus, we have a lot of stigma and certain attitudes towards children's ability, or young people's rather, not children's, young people's ability to engage in sexual activity. A lot of our conversations with children are very much focused on the risk around sex and not necessarily the pleasures that people derive from sex, and the pleasures that constitute a huge part of the reason that people have sex in the first place. But anyways, tonight I wanted to talk about a topic that's been on my heart for a while. I think we've talked about pieces, here and there, and I believe that we also had a conversation around sexual exploitation. And I know that usually, it's us talking and we're talking big people to big people, and that's intentional. I've intentionally set it that way. But knowing that many of you listening probably have children, and summer is coming up where they will have, or they might have, they'll have a lot more free time, I hope, and perhaps less adult supervision. I wanted to focus tonight on keeping young people safe from sexual predators. So definitely a topic that many of us would probably prefer not to think or talk about, because for some of us we can't fathom, what that might be like. But it's something that, unfortunately, many people have stories about their experiences with predators, their experiences as children, as young women, as young boys, with adults who violated them. So I wanted to talk about this summer and beyond how we can keep our children and young people safe from sexual predators. And yeah, the conversation is going to take a different tone tonight because I remember some time ago I asked some random people, in my contact list about their interactions or their experience as young people with adult predators. And many of them had stories. Actually, all of them had stories about being approached as children, sometimes in their school uniform, about the kinds of things that people would say to them as children, the kinds of looks that they would get, how people would attempt to touch them and things like that. And so this is not, unfortunately, something that's unfamiliar to many people. But I wanted to talk about it so that we keep in mind that it's something that happens. It's not something that, is just written in books or that we just see in movies. Or something that just happens, on Facebook, on Royal St. Kitts Nevis Police Force Facebook page. Like, these are real people with real cases and real experiences. So first, I wanted to kind of set the tone for the conversation tonight. Sexual predators. Those are adults or peers who exploit or abuse children and young people for sexual purposes. And oftentimes, and when we talk about sexual violence, rape, sexual assault, many times we think of it still as like the boogeyman or the boogie woman, in the alley, somebody who is hiding behind bushes. When most cases of sexual violence and sexual assault are reported having to do with people who are, or perpetrators who are familiar to the survivor or victim. So it's not somebody lurking around, a wall or anything like that typically. Oftentimes it's somebody who is known to the person. And so many times things like that don't start with force, right? Sometimes, especially when it comes to children and young people, something like grooming takes place. And grooming is a process where predators try to build trust with the child and sometimes even with their family before any abuse happens. So we're talking about manipulation. We're talking about how people abuse power and kindness and niceness and things like that to get people to trust them so that when things eventually escalate, it's like this person is somebody who has helped. It's somebody who has been around. It's somebody who has treated me kindly. So the things that happen between us might be okay. They might fit into all of what I have come to associate with love, with generosity, and so on, with genuineness, right? So sometimes they start with grooming to build trust with the child and perhaps even with their family members. And when we talk about sexual predators too, and one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation tonight is because we can help to reduce the risk or the exposure that our children might have to predators, or increase their ability to be able to identify when something is wrong. And in addition to that, to take steps to reach out to an adult or trusted person around them who can help them. So I wanted to talk about how important it is to be proactive with our education and our conversations with our children, and also to have very open communication with them. And beyond that too, because it's not just, the parents and the child's responsibility, it is also the community's responsibility. And the community is the school, the class, the church, the village in which the child lives. It is the people who see the child, who interact with the child, who notice the child walking away from school at 11 a.m. when the person should be, in a class. So that is the community around that child. And I also wanted to talk about it because it feels like, well, there are lots of things I think that have contributed to our losing this kind of village raising the child tradition that we had. But I think a huge manifestation of that has become like this kind of very individual approach to raising children, where it's like, I will raise my child, you will raise your child, me ain't got nothing to say, or me ain't got no reason to interact with your child, which also sometimes mean I don't need to look out for your child and you don't look out for mine, because sometimes we consider that as minding our business or minding people's business, right? So there are lots of levels at which protecting our children comes into play, and a lot of levels that contribute to situations where our children are left unprotected. And something like safety is a shared responsibility. As I mentioned, it involves parents, it involves schools, it involves caregivers, and it involves the broader society. And it means that we have to be invested in everybody's well-being. One of the things that I really wanted to mention too, in setting the tone for this conversation, is that, maybe share a reminder, as scary as it might feel, that our children are exposed to predators, and sometimes that exposure is daily. So we have to give them the tools to help to reduce the risk of exposure, or to get help if something happens. And of course, that is not something that is only on them, because we have to create supportive environments for there to be redress if something does happen, or for there to be intervention if something is reported. And I will get into that later on. So first, let's talk about grooming. Perhaps you have heard the term, but as I mentioned, predators often groom children, which involves building trust before the abuse. So some common grooming behaviors may include things like gifts. It could be secrets. So sometimes, you could build a bond through telling somebody something that you're saying only they know, or asking them to tell you something that they haven't told anybody else. So then you start to build this practice of keeping secrets between you two, between them two. Things like flattery, compliments, isolation from others. Those are some common grooming behaviors. Now, some red flags to consider are adults who are giving children excessive gifts. Adults who want alone time with a child, adults who want to keep secrets with children, or who encourage the children to keep secrets, especially from their parents. And it's also important to note that online grooming is just as dangerous and real as in-person grooming, right? So especially now, with technology and so many options for gifting people things, for sending people money, for conversing with people, there are so many opportunities for grooming to happen, which is all the more reason that parents and adults around children have to be vigilant and active about minding your child's business and being, fully aware of what is happening in their lives. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is how important it is to have open and age appropriate conversations. And I know we are here, and one of the purposes of this show is to remove the veil or the cloud of or shroud of secrecy from sex and have us talking about it more openly. And when I say openly, I don't necessarily mean on 4th Street, but I mean, within your relationships, with your peers, with your friends, with your church groups, anywhere the conversation will be useful and helpful, right? So in that vein, in that effort to encourage open conversations, I also want to encourage you to do the same with your children, with young people around you, which means talking about body safety early and age appropriately. So there's lots of research that you can do based on your child's age to find out like what is age appropriate or what are age appropriate conversations about sex and body safety and consent and agency or autonomy and boundaries with my child. So if my child is 3 years old, look up how do I talk to them about consent? How do I talk to them about boundaries? How do I talk to them about safe touch versus unsafe touch? And you could do it for any age, right? And you can find resources that are really helpful to you. You want to do things like teaching proper names for body parts and what private parts are. And you can start early, just like you teach your children other words, you can teach them words like penis and vagina so that children learn not just how to identify themselves for anatomical purposes, but so that they can let you know if someone touched them inappropriately, or let you know if something happened that made them feel comfortable. Because if they're not able to properly identify where things happened, it might make things a bit more, especially when you start to get into legal processes. And so it's just more helpful if people can accurately identify and speak about what it is they are saying happened to them. And as I mentioned, you also want to talk about, safe versus unsafe touch to let children know that they can say no. For example, and I wanted to mention this earlier today, another part of grooming, aside from wanting alone time with the child and things like that, there are some adults who always want to hug your child, even when the child is refusing. And those are things that you have to watch, because sometimes, you can see the child presenting visible resistance to a person. So sometimes even when children don't have the words to express what it is they're feeling, they know that something is making them uncomfortable. It just helps if they have the words. So adults who always want to be hugging and touching children, those are some red flags to look out for. And it's important to let our children know, even to family members, especially to family members, because family members are included in the list of possible predators, that they can say no, that they can refuse a hug from everyone if they want to, because it might be them attempting to protect themselves. And we have to ensure that our children understand boundaries so that they can protect themselves, and so that they can also identify themselves when things feel unsafe or things feel uncomfortable, and so that they can say no. We don't want to undermine our children's autonomy or their agency, because this will follow them through adulthood, right? So we want to ensure that our children know that they can say no just as much as they can say yes to things that they may be interested in, as they get older. And as I mentioned, saying no even to adults is okay, and is important. And it's also important to let them know that having secrets with other people, especially about their bodies, are never okay. So you have to build that relationship with your child where they have a clear understanding and age appropriate, conversations about what is okay versus what is not okay. I also wanted to talk about dating and honesty about sex, especially for teenagers and, older adolescents. Our difficulty talking about sex as adults carries over into our difficulty talking about sex to young people. And so oftentimes we're not very honest and open about sex to young people, whether they have questions or not. Or whether they ask questions or not, because they definitely do have questions. There are some of us, some parents who don't or didn't openly talk about sex. And I had a conversation this weekend with a friend where we were talking about just this, because we were talking about, people having children, and she and I both don't have any children. And we were reflecting on how both of our parents didn't openly talk to us about sex. Or if they did, it wasn't necessarily in sex positive ways, only conversations that were focused on risk and pregnancy and danger. Sometimes they didn't explicitly talk about those things, but that's what the crux of the conversation or the feelings were. And parents who were obviously very wary of conversations about sex or about the idea of their children having sex. And when I say children, I don't mean, young children. I mean their children as in, teenagers and so on. But we were also reflecting on the fact that those parents who were, not very open and honest and committed to talking about sex in useful ways, to answer questions, to help to satisfy teenage curiosity, are now running behind us for grandchildren. So it's like, I feel like, some of us were scared away from pregnancy, especially. And so now, pregnancy is not a thing that we are interested in, because we didn't have those conversations, those open conversations about it. And we were comparing it to a friend who has 2 children now, and her family situation was different. And they were she was talked to. Her and her parents talked about sex more openly and more honestly, because as I mentioned earlier, people have sex for lots of different reasons. Some people have sex to get pregnant, and some people have sex for pleasure. And that's okay. I think most people have sex for pleasure. Sometimes pregnancy comes, whether you want it or not. But it's important to make sure that we are not setting up sex as this big scary thing, which ironically doesn't mean that people stop having it or don't have it. It's just that they have it in secret. It's just that they have it without talking to you about it, which means then that if something happens, you might not be the person that they come to for help. You might not be the person that they come to cry about it, because nobody wants to tell you what's gonna happen. Nobody wants to get thrown out of their homes. I think it's important that we recognize that all of these things are healthy parts of the human experience, and it's important for us to respond to those healthy desires with accurate information, not with scare tactics, but with information that will help people to make informed decisions, will help people to decide, okay, if this is what I want for myself, does this align with it? Does this fit with my values? How can I do this safely and avoid XYZ, blah, blah, blah? Or if this happens, who can I turn to for help? If I get pregnant, and I don't want to be pregnant, can I turn to my parent? Can I turn to my aunt? Can I turn to my uncle for support? Not for adults to pressure me either way in any direction, but to be listened to and have my decision respected and validated. So just something definitely to bear in mind. Okay, let's take a short break here so that you can reflect on what we've talked about so far, and then we will come back and continue the conversation on how to keep children and young people safe from sexual predators. Stay tuned. Back, you're listening to Pleasure Pulse, or you're watching Pleasure Pulse, and I'm your host, Roma Richardson. You are joining me on ZIZ. Today is a very low-key kind of night, because I think all of us know what's in the atmosphere, and there's just a feeling, a heaviness that's around right now, which is in part related to tonight's conversation, but in part not, because these are ongoing, unfortunately, issues. So tonight we're talking about how to keep children and young people safe from sexual predators. And so far, we have discussed things like grooming and the importance of having open and age-appropriate conversations. I now want to get into digital safety in online spaces. And online spaces includes things like WhatsApp. No. I mean, when I was growing up, we had MSN Messenger, we had Yahoo, we had MySpace, and we had some versions of picture phones, right? They were kind of just coming out. So the pictures weren't very clear, but you could see what was happening in the pictures. And since then, we have had issues around online safety. And there are lots of risks, around social media, gaming, and chat platforms. I remember when I was growing up, we used to have these big chat rooms with just so many people in it. People talking about all sorts of things. From those chat rooms, people could find you and message you privately. I like that now, WhatsApp is has given us the option for broadcasts and groups where other people can talk or have access to other people who are in the group, because I definitely guarantee you that is a way that people connect with people that they shouldn't be connecting with. So it's important for us to, monitor our children's online usage. Not just monitor oh, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, come off of this, come off of that, taking with their phone, this. But it's learning about these tools, learning about how to safely use and navigate these tools, learning about them alongside your children, and talking to them about the kinds of things that they consume and the kinds of ways that they use those tools, right? There are ways to teach young people and probably ways that they can talk to us about, how they safely consume media, how they navigate those spaces safely without causing harm to other people, and in attempts to, reduce their own exposure to certain things. So it's important to discuss those things. Now, it's also very important to discuss safe internet habits, like not sharing personal information, knowing how to block or report people, knowing when something has escalated past the point that they are, okay to deal with, and knowing when to seek help from outside. I think it's also important for us to talk to our children about ways that they can seek redress or justice. So I feel like there are definitely a lot of things that our young people experience that we don't encourage them enough to carry to the police station. Like, there is more of that needs to happen. So sometimes it's like our children experience things and we just act like, okay, it's just a normal part of life and we could just move on. Like, no, especially because a lot of times when we're talking about, sexual predators, we're not talking about people who are first-time abusers. We're talking about people who have abused sometimes for their whole adult lives, and they're in their 70s and 80s and 90s. We're talking about sometimes people who have abused generations of people for generations. So it's important for us to, take the steps that we need to put actual stops to that, to initiate legal proceedings against people, to go to the police, to escalate things to that level. But back to the apps, and I said that too because, we have laws around things like child pornography, and not cyber harassment, but cyber pornography and things like that. And so there can be legal ways that we can take action on a lot of these things. And I think it's definitely important that we start to take those steps, as well as, community prevention and so on. So parents should know what apps their children are using. Depending on their age, we're talking about setting privacy settings and keeping communication open, especially with things like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, where like you could search for one thing and end up, 10 minutes later on an entirely different website, basically, based on the type of content that you are consuming. So it's important for us not to just give our children like devices and leave them, but ensure that we are monitoring their usage and that we are setting like privacy settings and safety protocols so that they can see only what they should see based on their ages. And then we also should teach children to not share personal information, as I mentioned, or images, because I know too that people are sometimes taking people's pictures from online and editing them to superimpose them on other people's bodies or things like that, and to report anything suspicious. And to let our children know, like, sometimes or oftentimes not everybody online is who they claim to be. So they could be talking to somebody who, is saying that they are a 15-year-old boy, just like they are a 15-year-old girl. And it could be a 50-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 28-year-old, So we have to establish and maintain relationships with our children in ways where they can come to us and be like, Mommy, you think this person sound like who they said they be? They said that, whatever. But I asked them to send me a picture. I asked them what school that I go and who is the teacher, and they can't tell me things like that. So what do you think? Like, we need to be able to have like those kinds of conversations with our children. And if our children are coming to us with those kinds of things, we have to find ways to receive them, even if we might be uncomfortable with the idea of something happening. Like, the fact that they are coming to us means that there is help that they believe we can provide, or help that they are seeking for us to provide. And shifting a bit away from that, as we were talking about grooming or abuse earlier, I wanted to just share some of the warning signs of abuse or grooming. And these are something that I think about from time to time when I'm thinking about students. I taught for it wasn't so short, altogether about 3 years. And one of the things that I picked up in teaching was that children and young people are going through a lot sometimes. And oftentimes, just like with adults, because I feel like we don't think that we can manage our emotions and our feelings better than we actually can in real life. And with children and young people, it might be even worse, right? So a lot of times, children are acting out, are being rude and disrespectful because they're going through things. Sometimes they are experiencing abuse, and that could be any type of abuse. So some of the warning signs of abuse are grooming, emotional warning signs, things like sudden changes in mood, fearfulness, or withdrawal, behavioral changes like regression, inappropriate knowledge of sex, avoiding certain adults, physical, unexplained bruises, infections, reluctance to change clothes, especially changing clothes in front of, other people or like their parents. Online, things like secrecy about internet use, new friends or gifts, and behavioral. I mentioned behavioral changes, but I also brought up the teaching thing because it's like, I have heard teachers talk about changes that they notice in students and just chalk it up to rudeness. As in, the child wasn't always this way, but has become this way. And instead of, investigating or asking questions, seeing what might be going on, is like, oh, they think there's big woman or big man now because they reach whatever. Sometimes it's children not wanting or young people not wanting to participate in certain activities because those activities are where the predators that they are trying to avoid are. And sometimes we ain't even realizing, because a lot of times we're not thinking like that. Sometimes we ain't realizing that our children are telling us something is happening in that space, and that's why I don't want to go to that space. No, of course, sometimes I just don't want to go to maths class. Sometimes it's that, but sometimes it's more than that. And I think it's absolutely necessary for us to be able to know when those distinctions are happening. And new friends or gifts. So sometimes our children are appearing with things that we ain't get them. They have money that we ain't get them. And we know they don't have any jobs. And we know that no other adult is allowed to give them anything without our approval. And sometimes we do act like we ain't see it. And I don't want to get into that part of the conversation, but I will just say those are signs of something, or can be signs of something happening that are necessary, that have to be looked into, because things may seem not life lasting now. It might seem like it was just this small thing, but trust me, those experiences follow people through life, and they show up in all sorts of ways. And one of those ways is the perpetration of violence. So violence is a cycle. I think we have said it in different ways. But when we say violence is a cycle, we also mean that it is intergenerational. So people who experience violence as young people, as children, or people who even witness it are more likely than their peers who didn't have the same experiences to perpetrate violence or to experience violence themselves in adulthood. So there are ways in which we are latently, supporting the future perpetration of violence by not intervening now in things where we can and changing the course of people's lives where we should. So as I mentioned, there are some emotional, behavioral, physical, online signs of grooming. Not as a result, but aside from, as a way to, help to protect our children, we should and can build protective circles around them. And those protective circles should be comprised of trusted adults that a child can talk to and feels comfortable talking to. And this trusted adult it's important that the parent trusts the adults that the child is talking to. But it's also, and even more so important, that the child trusts the adult that they are talking to. Because who might seem safe to you as a parent might not be safe at all to your child, right? So pay attention to those things and pay attention to how your child is responding to or interacting with other people around them, and not just adults but older children as well. It could be siblings, it could be family members, it could be friends, it could be classmates, it could be people who they go to school with. Pay attention to what's happening with your children and the spaces that they're in. We also want to encourage children to always tell if somebody makes them uncomfortable, no matter who it is. And I think, as adults who can struggle with that sometimes and are having to unlearn, that certain things are not our fault, that things happen to us that shouldn't have happened to us, that we experience things that we should not have had to experience. It might be difficult, communicating that to a child. It might be difficult to accept the fact that anyone really can be a predator, and that person can be the child's parent, but it's important for us to, if we want children to always tell if somebody makes them uncomfortable or if something happens, no matter who it is, then we also have to believe our children no matter who it is. And we also want to reinforce to them and remind them that it is never their fault. Teaching about consent and boundaries early is also part of building a protective circle. You want to build your children's confidence so that they can say no firmly. Predators prey, just like there is prey, just like there are predators who look for smaller victims, weaker victims. They find animals that are injured, or they find animals that are smaller than them. Predators also are looking for children who seem to have things like a weak support system, children who might be financially compromised, children who might be growing up in family environments where they are being abused or they're feeling neglected. So we want to ensure that that circle around our children is fully intact and is solid, so that we can help to protect them from predators, but also so that they can feel confident and comfortable to speak up if something happens. We also want them to encourage them to trust their instincts. So as I mentioned, sometimes even though people don't have the words for something that happened to them, they knew that it was wrong. Like I was watching this podcast a couple weeks ago, and the guest was talking about experiencing an uncomfortable situation as a child where she was at family's house and she woke up and an older uncle or grandfather or something like that was standing at the foot of her bed, like looking at her in a kind of way. And I think maybe she said that he might have tried to touch her or something like that. But the point was that she went and she told adults around her. And she was kind of talking about like not necessarily knowing what it is was wrong about the situation, but knowing that the situation felt wrong and made her uncomfortable. So it's important for us to help our children to develop those instincts and trust their instincts, so that they can tell us, however they need to tell us that something happened that made them feel uncomfortable. And beyond that, as I mentioned, it's not just parents' responsibilities. Schools and communities also have a role to play in this. Schools are supposed to have safeguarding policies and staff training. Schools are supposed to be a place that children can go to experience safety. Schools are not supposed to be the place that children experience violence. And I mean no kind of violence, including peer-on-peer fighting. Schools are supposed to be safe. We can introduce things like peer education and awareness programs. I think it's really effective when young people talk to other young people about the realities of being a young person, the things that they experience, how they can keep themselves and each other safe. But in addition to that, communities have to break the silence and reduce the stigma around speaking out. There are some communities that people talk about where things like incest are rampant and everybody knows, and it's just an accepted secret. And there are also communities where, let me not say communities. There are spaces in which, family homes in which, violence is taking place, and neighbors, teachers, sometimes the police in the area not responding and not intervening. And I know, I have had situations where even as an adult, I'm experiencing something and I can see other people seeing that I'm experiencing that thing. And when no one has stepped in for me, I have felt like it ain't even make no sense to say anything because you see it happening. And I can imagine that that is a similar feeling that a person experiencing abuse is feeling, because whether it is that they have gone to an adult and talked to them about it, or whether it is the signs, things have happened to make it clear. For example, sometimes you watch movies where you see the parent or whoever exiting the child's room at midnight or 1 a.m. or whatever, and then the partner just says nothing about it. And the child is aware of things like that. And where is the support? Where is the safety? Where is the person that child can go to? I know that there are lots of things that we turn a blind eye to, and that we know happen and we just talk about it oh yeah, I went to the supermarket today, and we just move on. We turn a blind eye to all of the bus drivers, all of the pastors, all of the teachers, all of the coaches, all of the extracurricular or club instructors, all of the aunts, uncles, godfathers, older family members. there are so many people, so many situations that we turn a blind eye to. Like, I remember growing up, I was told who to stay away from peers, from older people. And recently I was in a meeting and I heard somebody talk about a club for, I think it's boys, where the facilitator is suspected or known to be an abuser. Like, there have been cases or situations, that have been talked about. And yet this club is still operating. And there are lots of other spaces in which we constantly expose our children, environments that are predatory, that are violent, that we place our children in, knowing full well that they are violent. And I understand, like, a lot of times people are in precarious positions, right? So it's also important that if parents ask for help, that if parents say, I have run out of options, if parents say, I know that this thing happens here, but this is a place where I know my child will be fed and taken care of in other ways. It's important for us to step in and actually provide the help that people are asking for. Not just to provide the judgment, because we do that, but to provide the help and to provide the support, to provide the education, to provide the real transformation that people need to help to keep themselves and the people around them safe from violence. So what to do if you suspect that abuse is happening? Stay calm and listen without judgment. Believe the child and not pressure them for details, especially details that are or feel like they are attempting to invalidate what the child is saying. You want to report your concerns to Child Protection Services or to the police immediately. And you also want to ensure, and this is a point that I 100% would encourage, along with the others, that we find a way to seek professional counseling and support, because these are not things that we just move on from the next day. I have been dealing with a friend breakup for a couple years and I'm still grieving it. And it was just a friend breakup. These are acts of violence that affect people totally. Mentally, emotionally, behaviorally, psychologically, all of those these, right? And it's important for us to be proactive about seeking help. It's important for us to support people's individual journeys and their readiness to seek help, but it's definitely important for us to support it and to provide it if it is asked for. And as I mentioned, kind of earlier, we want to teach things like consent and respect for boundaries to young people early and consistently. And you can do that in lots of different ways and in age-appropriate ways as well. The way that you talk to a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old about boundaries might not be the same way that you talk to a 16-year-old about it. Because when it comes to the 16-year-old, you might make it explicitly related to sex, right? So you talk to them about the topic, consent, and respect for boundaries. We also want to promote self-confidence and assertiveness. We want young people who can speak up, and that's possible, which means that when they speak up, we have to celebrate that. It's not to see it as rudeness. If the communication comes off in a way that we might deem disrespectful, perhaps it has in some curse words, or perhaps the tone, is making us feel a kind of way, then we can talk about how children can reframe, or how they can maybe redirect certain energies. Perhaps certain emotions are fueling the way that they're talking to you about it. Is there a way where you can have a conversation with them where they can talk about their feelings and still talk to you, healthily and in a way where you can feel respected and cared for and all of those things. And I also mentioned, encourage them to trust their instincts. Yeah. I want to leave you with some questions tonight before I, try to leave on a hopeful note. Which are, what do you wish your parents or an older adult would have told you about sex when you were younger? What are some things you learned about sex that you want to unlearn? And what are some ways that you think you can begin to talk to your children openly and honestly about sex, including how to keep, themselves and other people safe? But I want to close by saying that, and I mean, my mood and all of those things, I think, fit the conversation. Like I mentioned, there's a heaviness, and I'm also feeling it too. But I know that prevention is possible. So sexual violence, sexual assault, rape, these things are not facts of life, in that they are not inevitable, they are not rites of passage, they are not things that everybody has to go through, they are not things that anybody should go through. And prevention is absolutely possible. Prevention takes everybody working together, because it is, in addition to actually preventing something from happening in the first place, it is responding if something does in ways that will support the survivor and also ensure that other people who might be experiencing similar things can use that as a positive model for what their experience of support and help and community love might be. I want to also encourage you to, have ongoing dialogue with your children, because it's important. Like, we have to be talking to our children. We have to keep in touch with our children. And this is not shouting at our children. It's not demanding things from our children. It is not just talking about risk and fear to our children. It is being open to questions. It is also asking questions. It is doing research and seeking resources to help you have those conversations. And I also want to let you know that, there are resources that are available locally. You can contact the department that deals with child protection services. You can have conversations there. You can contact the Ministry of Gender Affairs. I know those folks there are usually very helpful. There is a special victims unit of the police that can provide support to you. And yeah, I just also want to say, let's look out for each other, and let's work on keeping each other safe. Let us do the hard thing, do the difficult thing, say the hard thing, say the difficult thing, have honest conversations, and let us, as much as there are people around us who, we might be shocked to find out that they could do or could have done certain things. There might be names that surprise us, that we hear, but it's important for us to believe people when they say that something happened, and it's important for us to find ways to support them, to seek justice in ways that they are desirous of seeking justice. And yeah, I will leave you there. I encourage you to talk to your children. Again, prevention is possible, and I think conversations and communication are a huge part of that. So this was Pleasure Pulse, a tad topic. And no topics are off limits here. We are open to having, the difficult conversations too. And hopefully, if it's on national radio, you feel a little less intimidated to have that conversation too. So I will see you all next week. Have a good week and be safe and take care of each other. Bye.